here, as we pretty much ascertained, to the conversation series here at All Souls Interfaith Gathering. It's always been exciting. It gets more exciting each year, and we're so blessed to have Fran as our moderator or interviewer. I don't know what your title is. And for this particular session, this Wednesday, we have David Ellis, the gentleman closest to Fran, and he has been President and Director Emeritus of the Museum of Science in Boston. We have Michael Jager, who's the creative principal of Solidarity of Unbridled Labor, which used to be JDK, so he's gone obviously into more letters into his title. So welcome everyone, and please enjoy this very interesting and exciting session.
Thank you so much, Mary. Mary Abley is the creator and the head of this beautiful space that we are in. So welcome. You know, it was interesting. Curiosity, of course, has been my stock in trade in a lot of ways. So I was thrilled when this collaboration of folks said, well, why don't we have a theme of curiosity? So perfect this year. These conversations inspired by Shelburne Museum, Shelburne Farms, All Souls Interfaith Gathering, and now the Shelburne Library have been really something very special. It's a very special collaborative. This is, again, it's our fourth year. We've worked with a variety of themes, always also looking at, let's talk about spirit, art, and nature. This is the first task. Spirituality, art, and nature with some fabulous people. Would you do that, Fran? Yeah, I am so there. So this year, a very collaborative team from all of those places paired fascinating, creative, deep thinkers who meet for the first time on this stage. The same thing will happen next week when Rob Merman, who happens to be here, will meet Linda Wellings from Shelburne Farms. And in our last week, again, two that folks who are very creative, fascinating people will meet for the first time. And we'll have this conversation. Today, this is my assumption, but I assume that there are two very different approaches that we have here around the power of curiosity. Michael, of course, is in the business of finding out what makes people tick, what makes them respond, what makes them act in some way as a marketing guru. And David is a scientist, so I would think that he leans more towards questions that lead us to understand how the world works and what we and it are made of. So those are assumptions I'm coming with. We might find out something a little different. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then we'll explore how curiosity drives their work and lives, and then we'll also open it up to you. I'm sure that this conversation will stir some interest, some questions from you, so we will certainly spend a little time having a conversation with all of you. So a little bit about these amazing gentlemen. David Ellis, as you heard, was president and director of the Museum of Science in Boston, and the past president of Lafayette College after serving in high administration and faculty at the University of New Hampshire. During his professional life, David has been extensively involved in national organizations such as Elder Hostel, the National Science Foundation, the Association of Science Technology Centers, the Giant Screen Theater. Anyway, I'll cut down. He said, make it short, so I'll see what I can do. He's also the past president of the museum group. He also happens to have 7 honorary degrees. More recently, in what I would call his non-retirement, he has served as interim of the Boston Children's Museum, the interim executive director at the Harvard Museum of Natural History, and the Harvard Museum of Science and Culture. He has consulted throughout his career to museums, science centers, and universities. Most recently, a proposed museum in Antarctica, where he will be at a meeting about that again tomorrow, in a collaborative effort with the Chilean Navy and Harvard University. So at heart, David is a scientist with a PhD in chemistry from MIT. Michael Jager. Well, one thing I said to Mary, I said, please tell David, I think in the conversation I just had with him, which was a brief pre-interview conversation, I must have said wow about 10 times. Tell him I'll try not to do that. we actually have this conversation. Michael Jager, no less, is an astounding person and lives among us. He is the founding partner and chief creative officer of Solidarity of Unbridled Labor, formerly JDK Design. For more than 25 years, Michael has directed the creative and design efforts at Solidarity of Unbridled Labor, a studio focused on the idea that design distinction matters most. Guided by Ezra Pound's simply but elegantly stated principle, make it new, his collaborative output for a multitude of today's most recognizable and relevant brands, including Burton Snowboards, Microsoft's Xbox, Nike, Levi, Incase, Levi's Incase, right? Fish, okay, sorry. MTV, Virgin, Lululemon, Seventh Generation, Patagonia, and many more. These are recognized worldwide, and this is the guy behind those brands. Through Solidarity's own brand design incubation platform, Michael has helped create unique home, sport, and lifestyle brands such as Mamava and Maglianero. He is also the co-founder of the Karma Birdhouse. It's right downtown in Burlington, a creative economy workspace now home to more than 60 inspiring entrepreneurial entities. It is really cool and wow to have both of these guys here today. So we're gonna start this. We're gonna warm up with some pretty general questions about curiosity. And each of these sessions, actually, what's really fun for me is how each of them are gonna be different. So I'll just tease you with that. So my first question is, how has curiosity led you to just something great? And I'm gonna start with David. Where to begin? I'm sure many things.
Let me say first that it's a pleasure to be here. I've had the pleasure of knowing John for a while and meeting Mary some years ago. Was here once before. It's just a great pleasure to be here. And it's also nice to be thinking about some of these questions. I'm not sure that I can answer with a single item. But I would say that one of the things that has been most enjoyable and rewarding has been learning to ask answerable questions and understanding questions that are not answerable. Now, asking answerable questions is somewhat the stock and trade of scientists. But knowing when something is answerable is really important. And I think that the short answer, and yet it's not a single answer, is that using a curiosity to ask those questions that are answerable has really led to some very interesting and unusual places.
I have to follow up. Why do they need to be answerable? Does that mean they have to have a hypothesis? Or why does it have to be answerable to you?
Well, I'm drawing a distinction between perhaps what one would call, let's be very blunt, religion on one hand, spirituality on one hand, and on the other, let's say, the world we live in. We can study and learn something about the world we live in by asking questions such as why or how or what. We can't really have answers to those questions in the spiritual realm.
Okay.
And if I mix the two up, I'm only speaking for myself here. If I mix those two up, then I'm not very good at either.
Okay.
So my curiosity is about both, but my professional life has been largely in the answerable question.
Right. I'm going to move to Michael. So we hear something from him, and I might come back to you because I still want a concrete example about a question that led you to something great. And I'm going to see how Michael answers that question.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. As David said, it's really, this is a wonderfully inspiring space. Actually, it really is gorgeous. So hopefully it will lead to a wonderful conversation. It's fantastic that you started with the question, because that is the essence of what curiosity is about. I'm actually reading Warren Berger's book right now, A More Beautiful Question. And I think that will be a big part of this discussion tonight, because it's the ability to frame really unique views of what a question should be that really will move things forward. And one of the big challenges curiosity has is that the education system in many ways pushes you toward being in a race to answers. And that's what's validated in culture, is people who get to the answers quickly. And as amazing as things like Google and stuff are as well, it's like it's a quick route to the answers, which isn't the underpinning of curiosity. So this idea of framing beautiful questions, that should be the art form of education in the future. So Warren Berger's book, A More Beautiful Question, is really fascinating. It just came out, and it's really an intriguing ploy for a more beautiful question and deeper curiosity. So your question about something that happened that was great, I guess the context of great, I mean, I was trying to think of an example that was an interesting result of curiosity. With the reference to Burton snowboards as an example. I was growing up when, it's sort of back now, but vinyl when I was a kid, records and record covers, my whole dream in life was to do album covers. Because as I grew up on a small farm in St. Albans, the album covers were my portal to the future and to possibility, and music was really important. And album covers were iconic thresholds to possibility. What was interesting is the curious result of having grown up in the mountains, having been fortunate enough to be at the intersection of culture, of sideways sports, of surf, snow, and skateboarding. Snowboarding and the width of a snowboard, in a sense, became an album cover for me. And to be able to turn this object that you ride and you sort of have a relationship with gravity, the curious synapse from an album cover to this is kind of wide like an album cover. What if this acted like a cultural commentary like a Rolling Stones cover did that Andy Warhol worked on, but it's on a snowboard? And it was that sort of curious kind of question of like, what if the snowboard acted like that? And kids grew up on things that were built into their memories and what they stood for. And it was just those synapses create great opportunity. But it was just being curious enough to ask the question, like, what if that was acted another way? So that's a moment of what curiosity created a great opportunity for me and for a lot of people in the world.
And so, David, a moment in your vast career where you asked kind of the right question, and it led to something that was pretty different and new. I mean, all these museums, I'm sure that kind of magical things happened as you asked, what is the experience of the people in these museums, and how are we going to make it better? Or maybe it's something else. Maybe as a scientist, a question you asked, or a question you asked when you were a kid.
Well, you were kind enough to share that question ahead of time, and I have to say I do not have a single answer for that. I will say that a defining moment in my life was in college when I had the good fortune of a professor who, it was a small college, where you really got to know your professors. And we would occasionally have distinguished visitors on campus, and mostly juniors and seniors who would be invited to have, it was called tea, but it was really sherry. Some of us were under 21. After one of those, the professor said, "David, what do you think you're really good at?" And I have to be honest, I hadn't really thought about that. I did pretty well in school. I liked school. I liked learning. I still do. But he kind of pushed on that off and on for that semester. In fact, to the point where I got rather annoyed by it. But it helped me ultimately decide that I liked three things: people, I liked problem solving, and I was exceptionally good at handling numbers. And even though I had gone to college thinking I'd go into business, I ended up going into science. And I've ended up mostly with people business. That's what administration is. Oh, you better know numbers and you better be able to know your subject matter, but really the heart of it is people. And it was those experiences with Professor Green that really started me thinking about what kind of person am I? What are my aptitudes, and I don't mean SATs. What are my aptitudes, and how can they be useful?
That's great.
And it was by his asking those questions and forcing me to try to answer them.
Starting with yourself and who you are. You know, Michael, you started bringing this up, this whole age of Google, where inquiry, you know, we get our answers in an instant. This basically seems like a pretty fabulous thing. I love being able to do that. How is technology, though, changing the nature of inquiry? Is this, or even curiosity? How, you know, you're very in tune with this generation where it's very automatic. It's it's a little less so for me. But what do you see as the good and maybe not so positive sides of this instant inquiry and feeling we can get the answers instantly?
Yeah, that is a profound question and a big challenge. It is, it's absolutely a blessing and a curse in ways, for sure, that, you know, we have access to information immediately at a scale that the world has never seen or imagined. It is exponentially being fed as we sit here, getting even more vast by the moment. And access to that is really changing the way people work and create, like generations of people getting access to all of this information, whether it be science or music or arts, or it's really fascinating. So there's a lot of mix mastering of that happening, which is wonderful and amazing. And it's creating new ideas because of it. And you can see that affecting multiple disciplines. So that's one of the wonderful things about it. You can't necessarily trust everything that you're pulling in, which people are learning about. But there's also, you know, one of the dangers that I certainly have been experiencing and seeing is it's also a very surface relationship. The point I was making about Google before is that it is wonderful to be able to get to an answer within seconds, but it's a pretty surface relationship to that answer. And it's sort of doubly a problem because that answer is quickly there, but it's also a relationship like this. And David talked about people in the beginning. I think that was the first topic when we first met each other just a few moments ago. The people dimension of it is really essential. Having the ability to empathetically connect with people, to be genuinely interested in people, and experiences on a multi-sensory level. And there may well be a time where Google, actually, you can smell it and feel it, and maybe there'll be another dimension to it. But that willingness to go out and talk to people, and I sort of have, I guess, a relationship to my grandfather was known as one of these, he would talk to anybody and everybody, and, you know, of course, drove a lot of his kids crazy because he would constantly just be out there talking, but he was interested in people. He was interested in humanity, and that is a lot of what curiosity is about. And that's being affected negatively because of this. People are unwilling to just go out and talk to people. You're going to find more brilliant insights and frame better questions by talking to people, and never losing that. There was a quick representation of a masterful artist that had that ability. Spalding Gray, who sadly is no longer with us, he did a tour that maybe many of you saw at the Flynn that was based on the idea that everyone is interesting. And he was on the stage at the Flynn, and I thankfully was able to take my children to this, but he would go to the shows, he would go out to the line before people came in, and he would chat with people, and he would find people he thought were interesting, but he believed everyone was interesting. He would go onto the stage, 10 minutes later, with a desk, a glass of water, and a chair, and he would just invite people out of the audience, and it might be, oh, a 10-year-old girl from Milton, Vermont. And he would sit there and he would inquire about her life and have a conversation, and he believed everyone was interesting. And he could take the audience from laughter to tears to shock and awe because he was curious. But that doesn't happen when you're sending texts. It does not happen. So it's a blessing and a curse. It's amazing and it's stunningly dangerous, I guess.
And just quickly to follow up, you connected curiosity with empathy in a conversation, and that seems to be what you're talking about.
Yeah.
David, you're taking all kinds of notes. What's on your mind?
Well, right now I'm very interested in I guess I wouldn't have started by putting empathy together with curiosity. I guess I still don't. So I guess I'll ask a question. Elaborate a bit on how you see those coming together. I mean, I certainly know people that have both.
Yeah.
I guess I think I know people that have some of one and not much of the other.
Yeah. I mean, it may be partially motivated by part of what I do of trying to find, in the design and communication realm, I think it's really important to understand, hopefully, the good you're bringing or the benefit you might be bringing, and that means you have to understand intimately need. Like, you have to be empathetic to the need of the audience. Are they struggling with the complexity of the problem? Are they struggling with some physical relationship to a product you might have that could solve it for them? So it's curiosity that is the thread that you're kind of following, is a curiosity that's rooted in an empathetic relationship to their need.
Okay. Yeah,
so that's how I connect those. But
see, let me follow up on that a minute. To me, many times when I'm facing a situation or reading something, what will go through my mind are those simple questions of what or why or how or where or when. And there's something rather sterile in some ways about those questions. You bring people into it. And then there's a whole other side of it that I find absolutely fascinating. And certainly that, to me, is where the empathy would come in.
Right.
I got to think some more about curiosity and empathy.
Well, actually, if you're running a museum, you've got to be thinking about what is the experience, what are they looking for,
Absolutely.
It seems that a lot of questions come up that are based in empathy, in trying to have a sense of put yourself in their shoes, kind of way. I mean, what are some of the questions that you would ask when you're designing a museum?
One of the most fascinating things in the last 20 years, 25, 30 years, has been the degree to which the role of museums as they perceive themselves has changed.
Very much so.
Instead of being, it's all about the collections, and thank you very much, that's where we are. What is often referred to as education or the programmatic side has become much stronger. And I could name museums where the curators are very unhappy because they're no longer quite the top dogs they thought they were. And for directors, you want both. You don't want just one. But now let's ask the question. If I'm trying to determine an audience question, I could imagine I'm doing that because I care about what's best for the members of the audience. But I'll bet you I have some people on the staff who are thinking mostly about the finances.
I'm sure you are. There are those people too.
I likely have some trustees, depending on their outlook. They might be looking at either side of that equation, or both sides. So the question of being able to think about, appreciate, put oneself in somebody else's shoes, to me, is not, it is in some cases an answerable question. It is something that one can study, one can learn about, one can read papers about, one knows when there's good artistic work and bad artistic work. So I don't want to make science sound as if it's a very narrow domain. I think of it as a very broad domain, even while there's some questions I don't think I can answer.
Well, and to keep in the museum piece, it feels like museums are now set up to engage people in curiosity more.
Oh, absolutely.
To engage them rather than, here is the stuff you are to see. How do you kind of inspire and make people more curious? Is that right, or is that a perception that I have around how museums are shifting?
No, I think it's a fair perception.
Yeah.
Absolutely fair. And you spend a lot of time in a science center. It's often done through interactive exhibits. Increasingly in natural history museums, it will be done through media in some cases, in some cases through docents or guides or volunteers, whatever they're called in that institution, where their role is to be asking questions of the visitors and trying to get the visitors engaged. But in those institutions, that engagement will often take the form of asking questions. For instance, let me just ask a question. Fran asked me a little while ago, I always carry reading materials with me. And so now is a wonderful asking. How many of you have ever seen a Luna moth? Yeah, I thought so. What kind of tails do Luna moths have? Long ones. Kind of hang down, right? Here's an article in the most recent issue of the journal Science. Luna moths' tails fool, and I won't tell you what. What do they fool? Bat sonar. Now, I mean, to me, what's fun about life is simply picking up a journal and seeing what's in it that's fun. But it's usually around things I've never heard of or never thought of or never made a connection with.
But somebody asked that question. What do those do?
Exactly right.
So we'll move from museums back to design.
Oh, good.
And how does curiosity affect design? How do you use questions, those beautiful questions, or curiosity, or how do you engage your staff to ask the right questions and to create great design? And we might even, after you move into a possibly interactive thing.
Well, there are a few things. I'd like to stay on the museum thing for just a moment, if we could, because I think and it could be applicable actually to where we go with how do you then move into design thinking and how do you create deeper understanding. But the museum front, it is absolutely a dynamically changing place. Technology is doing a lot of it as interaction shifts in people's expectations. Museums have moved into an era of edutainment. Because they are now competing with entertainment all around them. So it's really shifting from this sort of place where you went and it was a fairly static relationship to a collection. And it's not just in art, it was a number of different things, but it's sort of realized that it's really in the age of edutainment. And there's a lot of people doing some really beautiful things with it. I actually connected with Janie Cohen, and we did a thing with the New England Museums about 2 years ago. I think the conference was here in Burlington. And I did a talk there about Set My Mind Ablaze was the title. And it's like, that's the job of museums, to set people's minds ablaze with insight and question and excitement, which gets you to think about experiential design. And I do have some, and you may well have created a moment that honestly changed my life at the Boston Science Museum, which is really wonderful about what life does, the curious kind of connections that happen. When I was 9 years old, my family took a trip to Boston. We went from St. Albans to the Boston Science Museum. I was severely dyslexic, so I could barely read. I'm not a numbers guy at all. I couldn't deal with numbers. I barely made it through general math in school. So drawing became my thing. I was about creativity and art and just saw it in a different way. Numbers were not my creativity. So the Science Museum was kind of like, yeah, okay, I want to do other things in Boston, but we went to the Science Museum, and it was a very, very interesting experience on a lot of levels, but there was something that really changed my perspective there, and it was a thing called Mathematica, because I was completely in fear of math, because I was such a failure at it. And Mathematica, which Charles and Ray Eames designed, there is one set of it that is at the Boston Science Museum. And there was this one piece in Mathematica that was, basically it's about 10 feet high, about 20 to 25 feet long. It's a glass aquarium-like case. And when you look at the side of it, it's all this bizarre liquid sort of fluid geometry flying through space. But when you walk around the end of it and you look through a lens, it's this absolutely symmetric, perfectly balanced mathematic harmony. And then when you walk around the other side, you see the liquid form that math has. And it completely changed my understanding of math. I suddenly had this realization, because people would try to tell me, math is really beautiful, it's really important, it's embedded in, and I'd be like, I don't understand how fractions work. But that really did change my life. And I remembered that more than anything about that trip. And I have made that reference to people at Microsoft when they were trying to understand, how does our brand be relevant in culture? And it would be like, you have to have that symmetric organization, but at the same time be adaptable and liquid like math is. But that really changed my perception of what ideas were about, and math was a doorway that I never expected to get anything out of. So the Science Museum did change my view of life.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. So museums are a beautiful, beautiful thing. So anyway, I'm drifting now.
We were getting, so then, how do you,
design process.
Curiosity and questions for design. How do you use that?
It is about probing questions, getting people to sort of ask things of themselves or communicate things that they maybe wouldn't. A lot of it, and we'll do a little experiment here in a few minutes, but trying to create situations where people maybe lose their guard of how they frame up questions, or pushing it to this extreme place where they just go deeper. That's a lot of what the process is about. Because there's a lot of fairly easy, hollow communication things you can do, and they really bore people. They don't make deep emotional connections. So you need to probe further, you need to have people prototype, you need to have them do things they wouldn't normally do as far as putting images together or putting words together or creating rebuses or creating these sort of jarring associations that get them to talk about things in a way or express ideas in a way they wouldn't, and you'll get these ideas revealed that then you're like, oh, that's how we should approach this. So a lot of it, there's an emerging discipline called design thinking, and it's very much about that. It's sort of getting inside people's lives and really trying to get more intimately connected to need and so on. And it's really fun and amazing, but it's kind of probing in curious ways.
Response.
Well, response and add-on. One of the fascinating things in a museum when you're thinking about a new exhibit, try to put yourselves in a position of you're been asked to develop an exhibit on climate change or water or fracking. You're trying to think of an issue that the public would have an interest in, and how do you frame that subject in a way that would be challenging, exciting to a younger boy from St. Albans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we frequently used focus groups to try to do that. Now, I'll just ask, how many of you have ever participated in a focus group? Good number. Did you enjoy it? in the hands of a good leader, if people have developed some scenarios to play with in that group, it is a wonderful way to bring out in the participants what they're curious about and what excites them. And that's one of the things that I think, thank you, yes, I hope we do it, you're a great example. I made a list of alumni of the museum. You're going to get added to it. If I were still there, you'd be on it. Who did the museum affect? But one of the things about that connection, it frequently is nurtured by the curiosity of the participant in the focus group. It's not just the curiosity of the staff. It comes out of the people who are going to be part of it.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's important to know what they're curious about.
Yeah. And
We
pushing
can't always,
them.
and pushing them.
you have to.
We
I
can't
think it's
always.
pushing
You
them.
have to.
There's, I think that's really essential, and knowing how to do that in a reasonable and human way. But it's because a lot of people will give surface answers to things, and you can't let them get away with that. It's Sister Carita, who is an amazing, was one of the most amazing teachers and artists, in my opinion, in the 60s and 70s. She actually worked a lot with Charles and Ray Eames and did a lot of really wonderful things. And I think I might have mentioned this to you. She would. How many people know Sister Carita? Are you familiar with her work?
I've heard the name.
I do now.
An amazing artist. She did in Boston the Boston gas tanks with the big brush strokes. That's one of Carita's pieces of art. But she was an activist and an artist that was just incredibly talented. But one of her greatest talents was teaching. One of the famous pieces of homework that she challenged her class with, she had Charles and Ray Eames come in and show one of their many films. They showed the film, and the homework that night was you needed to come in the next day with 200 questions about the film. Not 10 questions about the film, 200 questions about the film, which isn't just punishment or brutal. It's like, those students came in with some deep, deep thinking about that they never would have found in 20 questions. You never would have found in 40 questions, but in 200 questions, you're going to go to a whole other level, and it's her pushing them to be curious. And she also would put people into a state of getting lost in the making. So she would find curiosity and unique answers by, don't think about what you're doing, just do, and you will subconsciously find answers to work and problem solving in that just by doing and less analyzing what you're doing. So she had a lot of amazing techniques that were about curiosity.
And we are going to do an exercise, and I'd like to do that in a minute, but one last question before we get there. Both of you, we entered into health and physicality and how curiosity affects us physically. And you went to neuroscience, and you went to adrenaline, I think. But anyway, just some quick thoughts about, does curiosity and physicality, is there a connection there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there is, but I was just kind of joking here. How many of you ever heard of Dupuytren's contraction? That's what this is. Many older people have it. It comes out of mostly Northern Europe, genes. It's fascinating to ask now for a moment about the physical world in terms of health. And where does our knowledge about our health come from? Maybe because we live in Boston part of the time, and maybe because of background and interest of my wife and myself, but more her. We spend a lot of time around medical people. And they're very, very interesting people to be around if you get below the surface. Not only do they have very wide interests frequently, but when I asked the doctor recently, this is my third operation, the other two were on this hand, he had no problem telling me for about 5 minutes, which was more than he was supposed to spend with me when he was taking the stitches out, all about the biology of hands, palms of hands, and the bottom of feet, and why they have parts and similar in terms of the nature of the material that makes up the skin on the bottom of your feet and the palm of your hand. Well, guess where that came from? Think about it. And one of the things I guess I'm trying to get at here, more or less in answer to your question, Fran, is that I think we can look at so many things that are in front of us. And if we go a little bit deeper, maybe not 200 questions, but if we go a little deeper and ask some of these why, when, how, where kinds of questions, it opens up a wonderful, interesting life of trying to find the answers. And with the internet, you can frequently find those answers in a way that people 20 years ago would have had to work much harder to find, if they could have found it all.
Yeah.
And your quick answer to that, because I'd like to
The physical?
get to your exercise, which I think will be fun for everybody, and then get to some of everybody else's questions as well.
Yeah, the importance of the physical in curiosity. There's a lot of things are happening around mindfulness now, which is wonderful. There's kind of an awakening for some around that on a larger scale. But it's really about sort of flow state. I had, an individual that I worked with years and years ago was one of the founders of Merrill Footwear. And I remember, his name is John Schweitzer. Many of you may know him, but he and Clark Mattis started Merrill Footwear. And he was just fascinated with hiking and making hiking accessible, and it wasn't only about this, crazy summits and, defying nature and all this stuff. He was more about just get people out hiking and walking, and it'll change lives. But he had really amazing theories about just, he was like, Michael, I'm telling you, if you get people hiking, just accessible hiking in paths so that they can do it easily and comfortably, and whether it's you and a friend or you and your wife or whatever partner, and there's something about the rhythm of walking and being in nature and making that accessible, you will have conversations with that person you would never have otherwise. And it had to do with the rhythm, it had to do with heart rate, it had to do with being in nature, and that flow state, there is a physicality to curiosity, getting yourself to a place where you're comfortable to maybe ask questions you wouldn't normally ask, even of someone you're very intimate with. And he totally believed in that. That's why Merrill, for him, was a cause. It's like, I want people to be in the woods having conversations they never would have had otherwise. And that's about physical relationship to ideas and asking sometimes tough questions or wonderful questions. So I think it's really important.
And next week, we'll get deeper into that one, I'm sure, with Linda Wellings. So Michael brought a quick little exercise, and while you're thinking about what you want to ask, I still have a zillion questions here, of course, but we're having a great conversation. He just brought up, when we were having just a quick pre-interview, an exercise that he does when he's working with his folks. And you've probably all seen a Rorschach test, but you probably haven't quite seen it done. So I thought he could demonstrate that for us. And maybe you'll see what you see in it. We'll see what David and Michael might see in it. And we're not going to spend a lot of time with this, but it's going to be pretty cool to see a little bit of how Michael does his work. And since Michael's going to be working away at that, I will ask David one more question. Is it, there's this Pandora's box thing. Is there a dark side to curiosity? I mean, can we get, there's always the cautionary, you don't want to put your hand in the stove. We have our kids or something that might hurt us.
Personally, I don't think so. One better use some common sense, if that's what about the stove. But beyond that, I have a hard time seeing where there's a downside. I think a person can become over-engrossed, and I've been known to do that. I mean, you could give me a free afternoon and I could start down a path with one question and hit 10 other things along the way and just have a ball. And the next thing I'd know, that afternoon would be completely gone. So maybe there's that excess question.
Right.
But I don't think, I have a hard time thinking of downsides, but maybe.
Or if it's a celebrity, perhaps, celebrity obsession.
Well,
that's an interesting kind of curiosity.
Well, now wait a minute, you've brought in something else. I don't think obsession and curiosity are the same.
Celebrity.
I don't think
Obsession.
celebrity.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, got it.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm curious about how was this built, what was in the mind of the architect, what are the acoustics like on these panels? I mean, I could go on and have a fabulous time asking the questions and trying to think about what the answers might be or how I might get an answer. I could see a face here and it reminds me of someone. So I begin to go down that path. So curiosity to me is just wonderful because it opens those questions.
Amen.
So,
Michael, thank you, David.
Dark side, or you want to talk about this?
I think I'll talk about this.
Well, this is a fairly simple idea, but why don't we
Want me to hold
grab
anything?
a Sharpie? I think we're tethered up here, so I can't really run out there. But if any of you would like to come up, you could grab these three pieces, and three of you could open them up and just write on it whatever, of course, your response is to this image, whatever word, thought you want to connect to it. So any one of you, and we can give it to three different people, and then you can hand them back to me, and then I'll show you how we use this technique. So we usually have an entire group of people do these Rorschach tests, and then what we do is once the room has done them, you'll actually hand them to the person on your left, and they will respond to the Rorschach test that you've made, and then we collect all those pieces. And what's curious about it is that it's basically a forced association game where you may have a certain topic that you're working on, or a certain problem or question you're trying to answer. And then in the middle of that conversation, you could inject an idea that might be lunar mothtails might show up, that it looks like, and you start thinking about like, oh, lunar mothtails, that they are, they actually change, bat radar. And it's like, okay, what if we use the metaphor of radar for this communication platform or whatever it may be? But it's just a forced association technique that changes the path of the conversation. And it's really fun.
Let's have those go around a little bit. And meanwhile, are there some questions that have been stirring?
How many responses would you like? You have 3 or 4 already back here.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could, each of you could put a thought or a word, and we'll just, do 5 or 6, and we'll see where they go. Or you could even call out to us and say you've got a thought, and it's like you just toss it up to David and I, and we'll see where it goes. But we're curious to see what'll happen, just like you should be.
These are fun games.
It's interesting. Go ahead. One of the things about this is that it's interesting how much curiosity is affected by fear. People that are curious are generally not that afraid. It's afraid to ask questions, not afraid to ask questions that they maybe don't know the answer to. They're more pulled forward by it. But a lot of what happens in culture as you get more and more focus on the answer, and that and society praises people with the answers versus the question makers. It's interesting, it digs you further into being afraid to ask questions. And so fear is an interesting dimension to curiosity.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that. I think Michael's making an extremely important point, really an important point. I think there may also be a little bit of function of age, but I think the question of willingness to ask questions, particularly the hard questions or the ones you're a little afraid of the answer, is very much a part of life for some people.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I kind of skipped over, but we can come back to, is the connection between curiosity and imagination or innovation. How do they meet? And your laughter comes from David. You want to?
Well, I like to read biography. And one of the things that's fun about reading biographies is to realize how often people's discoveries came out of questions. And a commitment to trying to figure out, well, why not? There's a man by the name of Wendell Johnson who had 3 wonderful sayings that I write down because I like. What do you mean? How do you know? And what then? That covers a whale of a lot of ground. And if you're really going to have clear communication and clear thinking, those are 3 great questions.
Your thoughts about just that connection, curiosity and imagination or innovation. That's what you do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is cross-fertilization of ideas, like thinking in a kind of super collider way of mashing ideas together that maybe you don't think intuitively belong together, is a lot of where innovation happens. I think one of the most beautiful questions on the list that you shared, David, was to me was and then what?
Yeah.
Ira Glass, when he talks about This American Life story, a lot of what's intriguing is he said the most powerful thing that he does, and he makes it sound very easy, but he talks about you just need to keep tethering people along, and then what happened? And how did that make you feel? And it's like you just need to keep baiting the curiosity forward, and people will start asking questions of themselves. So it's that question of like, and what happened next? Like, oh, how did that feel? Like and it's really, that's an important one because it pulls the idea forward, which is about innovation. Like, how might that make you feel? That it's those tethers that you need to create for innovation and imagination.
Keep going for a better question, deeper question.
Well, just
David.
a quick thought.
Yeah.
The other thing is that it lets you begin then to let your mind go much more broadly to ask, what could this mean? What could I do? It helps the person who's asking the question answer what might be their role in whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I think it's that connection with people that is so important.
Fabulous. Again, as somebody starts bringing up these great things, some questions from you. We'll go another 5 or 10 minutes. Everybody good with that? Yes.
This is for David. You drew a distinction between questions that can be answered and questions that can't be answered. Maybe science, physicality or reality versus supernatural or spirit. In which category would you put a philosophical question? For example, what is curiosity? Or what is consciousness? And these are usually questions that have many answers, and it's difficult to determine, well, you don't know if there's what the right answer is. So which side would you put
if you can repeat the question to some degree. This is a question about where does a question like what is curiosity, what is consciousness stand in that answerable and or unanswerable, more spiritual questions. Is that in a nutshell get it? Go ahead, David.
My answer would be that first of all, there's some questions that can be both. So I'm going to retreat from saying it has to be one or the other. And second, I would say there are certainly questions that we've learned we can answer over time. If anybody has watched anything about the field of neuroscience in the last 40 years, the first grant in the area of neuroscience in the United States was 1962. It helped set up something called the Neurosciences Research Center. What we know today about the brain compared with 50-some years ago is astronomically different. But there's still some questions about the brain we don't know. Now, that's not saying that they're unanswerable. It may be that we can't answer them with the tools at hand.
So you have a third category.
Well, I have a category that says we may be able to answer. Yes, I do. And I believe likely, in terms of the more philosophical level, there might well be many questions that have aspects that are both. I would fight very hard to be put in the trap of saying it has to be one or the other.
What about, well, consciousness really lends itself to the possibility of being answered differently in the future. But what about something like what is curiosity, which probably isn't going to change. The range of answers aren't going to change 10 or 20 years from now, but there's probably not one answer, as we see. There's a bunch of answers. So would you consider that an answerable question, or a spiritual, non-answerable question, or is there a fourth category?
For me, I think I would put curiosity as something that can be described, but something that we do not necessarily, are not able at this point at least, to ascribe what causes it. So there's something about the descriptive that may be different from the causal. I don't know if that helps.
No. I understand.
Michael, you have some, I mean, we didn't even really get to curiosity enhancing spiritual life, but we're broaching that a little bit right
And
now.
that probably, it's interesting, I mean, that the question of curiosity probably changed over time, over the ages. Like when you think about, initially curiosity was survival. You know, people were like, I need to eat, I need to be warm. It was like your curiosity was completely motivated by food, mating, shelter, and you were curious about how you were going to solve that. There's actually at Stone Soup, one of my favorite spots in town, there's an engraving in the restroom downstairs, and it's an image of this Neanderthal-like character, and he's like hunched over by the side of the ocean, and it was the first experiencing of eating an oyster. And it says, at first fright and then delight. And the look on this guy's face is just, it's perfectly like sort of scared and sort of in love with this experience. But it's really telling. It's like, imagine being in that place of that person curious about, how am I going to stay alive another day? I'm going to eat this thing. Like, I'm going to smash, like, that's amazing. But it's like, that's where curiosity started. But then it's like learning on learning on learning on learning on learning.
Is that really any different than your Rorschach test sampled among a number of people? In other words, you may be asking different questions. You may know the answer to what the caveman asked now and not to this one, but the concept of curiosity, the question, what is curiosity itself? Wouldn't you think it's still the same answer or the same battery of answers? Do you think the caveman is less curious than the Merrill Shoe Company owner?
Or do we have more time to be curious? And
well, I
does
think
that make a difference?
Guess, yeah, it's a good question. I guess it's the motivation for the curiosity is probably altered in some way because it's expanded because it is like, how am I going to entertain myself is so different than how am I going to feed myself. So it's just expanded over time.
But I would venture there's a lot that's still the same.
Yeah,
A lot that's the same. But there are differences as well.
over
Expansion,
time.
So we usually go till about 15:15. I hope that's still working for people, but just know that I think I said 5 or 10 anyway. Hope that works for everybody. That's about when I will definitely close by then, but this is feeling very warmed up. We still have the spirituality. Since these are here, and I'll have you, we'll leave them up here so you all can see them. I think what's so interesting to me, Michael, and I'll show them to you, some people saw it this way, some people saw it this way,
Yeah.
and
Which
why
is
not?
wonderful. Yeah, perfect.
And everything from the things that they reminded them to free above and below. So that's a concept, not something that they saw. A fully formed idea, innovation and staticity. I mean, wow, we have some pretty amazing
Stuff where I'm terrible.
thought people in this group. So do you have any more thoughts about this? And then we'll just do a few more
I mean, if you want to
questions.
just pick one, pick a word, and let's see where we go with it.
Okay, slug trails. I don't know, it's the first one that just popped out.
Slug trails.
Or you can pick your own. There, I'll just hand these over to you.
Slug trails is
Slug
good.
trails is pretty good, huh?
Here. If you want to hear some, why don't we share some of them? There's puppy paws in mud, insect and helicopters, somewhat menacing.
Hold it up for them.
Smiling clown.
Why don't you read
Oh.
a few?
In addition to slug trails, we have water birds, the colon, free above and below, herons, calligraphy, touching, and here's one that I really like, wind dance.
Ooh, I have dancing tumbleweed, too, here. Face in a hood. Exercise machine, music, like that. Another concept. A fully formed idea and gem of a new idea. Wow.
It's interesting. If you imagine, there's many, many good ones, and you can imagine, hearing these, the possibilities of it. But David, you called out wind dancing. So if you thought about curiosity as a dance, like what is curiosity in your life, and maybe even that has to do with the spiritual topic that we'll end on. But
Right.
if you think about wind dance and you think about life and a life of curiosity, you think about somebody like John Muir, like tying himself to the top of a sequoia tree. That is wind dancing to learn about our relationship and responsibility with nature. I mean, so where could that take you if you were trying to solve some problem? Like, if you thought of it as a wind dance, where would our imagination blow us? What if we blew ourselves over to look at it from a context from India versus Brooklyn? It's like you can take ideas, from it, but wind dance is a powerful idea.
Very powerful, yeah.
Particularly as long as I don't have to answer your questions. But I want to be serious for a moment. I think one of the things that young people need, and maybe older people, including this 79-year-old, I think we often need help in getting out of whatever our particular box of way of thinking is.
Yeah.
And if it's this that helps us, or if it's discussion that helps us, or it's a spouse or friend or partner that says, oh, come on, this is the way it is, or whatever. I really believe we need to find ways to get out of our boxes.
Yeah. And it's interesting, part of the paradoxical issue with curiosity is theoretically pulling you forward. A lot of the art form is unlearning. Is the ability to get away from the conventions you've built around your thinking. It's like its curiosity is really fueled by unlearning, the willingness to, because the older we get, the more conventions get built up, and you have to work really hard to unlearn.
And it's not about the answers. It's
Right.
about what are the questions.
Yeah.
Which does bring me back to how curiosity enhances the spiritual life. For some, religions, here are the answers. It can be very different, and curiosity can be a problem for religions. But for a spiritual life, it seems like it can enhance that. Some thoughts that you might have had around that question, or
I'll let you start on this one.
Wow.
in
That's
this space.
That's a huge one. It's I don't just be interested. I don't know. I don't know that I've found the answer yet. I don't know that maybe some of you have, but it's really being interested in the perspectives that have emerged around the world and exploring and looking at that. I think is just essential to it. And what can you learn from each? What parallels are there? What contrasts are there, and why? But I don't know, I think it's
Or
just
does it
important to have as
threaten
much breadth and expanded thinking as possible. The further you can stretch your mind to what's out there, the more compelling the journey will be for you to sort of find your view of what is about, or where your comfort is found.
Thanks.
I grew up in a reasonably conservative denomination called Church of the Brethren in Pennsylvania. It's very similar to the Amish and Mennonite. My father, among other things, was a minister, though he was in academic life most of the time. I married a woman whose roots in the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church are infinitely deep. Both of her parents, grandparents, and others. Her family, partly with her prodding, left the Missouri Synod, which is quite conservative, and became Congregationals in the 50s, 60s. She later went on to get a Master of Divinity at Union Theological, which is likely considered one of the more liberal of the seminaries in the United States. And we have many discussions on many of these subjects that relate to where does science, where does life and human life relate? And I think I'm sure the time my wife and I have spent on this over the years has been in the hundreds, if not 1,000+ hours. And I'm also sure that for me now, I'm only speak for myself, I don't know that I have answers. I, at times, a more regular attender at the Congregational Church in Durham, New Hampshire, or in Boston, Old South, but other times not. I know most of my science friends are either atheists or agnostics, but not all. And there's some wonderful examples of very well-known scientists who are very strong believers. And so I guess for me it's an unfinished question. But I will say that the principles that underlie Christianity, and to a very considerable degree Islam, are principles that I can agree with and support. Do I believe in an afterlife? I don't think so. Do I believe that God made Earth? I don't know. I'm not sure I know what caused the Big Bang. I'm not sure anybody knows. There's so many unanswered questions. But it comes back for me, to be very blunt, in how do I want to live my life? And frankly, that question is one that I really feel strongly about. Really strongly. I need to ask that of myself. So that's where I'm back to this point.
I think that's a good place to close.
Beautiful.
I'm sorry we didn't have more interaction. I'm sure that Michael and David will stick around for a little bit if you are interested in talking with them a little bit more. This has been a wonderful conversation for me. I want to thank you both. Next week, interestingly enough, has been declared Question Week by Warren Berger, the guy who wrote this book called A More Beautiful Question. Isn't that perfect? So he's asking educators from all over the country to send in great questions and do different things, and it's in honor of Einstein's birthday, who of course said, "I have no special talents, I am only passionately curious." So thank you all so much for being here today, and we hope that you return on another Wednesday during this conversation series. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.